So it is genuinely my great pleasure to introduce a repeat frequent flyer at the festival, Professor Jerry Brotton. He's been coming here for a number of years, and I think this is your fourth.
15.
Yeah, just feels like that, honey.
Yeah.
So we are really, really pleased to have him again. He is Professor of Renaissance Studies at Queen Mary University of London, and he is a prize-winning and best-selling broadcaster, curator, and author. He is the author of a variety of books, including A History of the World in 12 Maps, which is brilliant, this Orient Isle, which is brilliant, Elizabeth England and the Islamic World, I haven't read, but I will, and The Other Tudors. He is also the presenter of the podcast, What's Your Map? And today, Jerry will be taking us on a journey around the 4 points of the compass. One of my favourite novelists, Nancy Mitford, once described life as a bit of a grind, but just every now and again, there are currents in the bottom, and I would like to introduce you to my favourite current. Thank you.
No pressure then. Hello. It is really wonderful. I think Joan runs one of the best festivals, I think, going, and I don't just say that because I've been to a lot. And it's really wonderful. It's personally wonderful for me because some of you may be able to tell immediately, I am, as they say, from the north. I was born in St Luke's in Bradford, in the west. But I'm here in what we like to call the East Riding still, yeah? And so I like to do this because who here is not northern? Southerners? Have we got southerners? Sorry, you see. So the talk is partly about this, because look, southerners go, sorry, I'm from the south. Northerners go, I'm from the north, yes, yes. Which I do, and I play with it. I mean, I do joke about it. I mean, I have a joke that, you know, my BBC radio career is defined by my flat vowels. You know, I go to those meetings and go, hello, I'm from the north. They go, please do a presentation for us. The south, you know, everybody's slightly apologetic for being from the south. And then I go, are there any easterners? No, nobody defines themselves as being from the east, do they? And somebody go, what? Where are you from? Norfolk or Lincolnshire, but there isn't an identity. People don't define themselves as easterners. Westerners. I was at Hay Festival the other day and somebody said, I'm from Devon, I'm a westerner. But there were very few people, of course, who nationally would define themselves as westerners. But when we're all in, I don't know, in Hong Kong, we define ourselves as westerners. So what the talk is about, really, 4 points of the compass, it's partly about the sort of science and the history about the compass, but partly it's also about the idea of identity. Don't need to see the book title. It's about that sense, I love through the north, you know, the north. You know, I went to university in 1987 to Sussex, and I remember sitting on the grass there, and I met this woman, and she said, you're from the north? Is that near Oxford? And I could see her imaginative geography, it just got a bit dark. And then she went, but you seem to be quite clever. So that was good, that was a good start. So I'm going to talk about direction, because then I also want to say, I sort of am ambivalently proud being a northerner, and I play it, and it's a stereotype, and we all do that, we play slightly with the stereotype, don't we? But actually, I also then refuse to be defined by a geomagnetic compass. That idea of being a northerner is the title that we use, but of course if you're in Italy, it's the other way around. If you come from the north in Italy, prosperous, industrialized, highly educated, it's really how we see the south. So it's a stereotype to some extent, and it all depends where you stand. And that's very much, I guess, the point I'm making. Not to say that everything is relative and it's all a bit mushy, but there is a sense in which there is nothing absolute about directionality and north and south and east and west. So one question I pose to you, why is north at the top of all our world maps? Well, any maps that we still have, because now we just look online. And how many of us actually have a standard world map? Growing up, I did, because I had a printed atlas. I'm old enough to have one. We don't anymore. Oh, hand up, there's somebody at the back. Trouble at the back. Yes. Well, we'll talk about this in terms of, you know, what kind of standardized maps that you use, but you tend to think that north, like here, is on the top. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about why that might be. Why are we hardwired to think that north should be at the top? Indeed, why do we think north is up and we go down to London? We're on a globe. There's no such thing as that going up or down. You know, we're not higher than London. So I'm going to talk to you really, I'm going to talk you through the 4 points of the compass, north, east, south, and west. Just a few thousand years we're going to go over. So we've got half an hour? Yeah, good. So I just want to talk you through the sort of history about the way in which these directions change and shift, and how they also affect senses of identity. So this is the first image that I want to show you. I love showing this because many of you will know this image. This is the very famous blue marble photograph, which is the first taken of the whole Earth. It's not the Earthrise image from the moon, which some of you will have seen, but this is taken on board the NASA's Apollo 17 mission in December, on December the 7th, 1972. There were 3 astronauts on board that mission. One of them took this image, and we don't know which one. They went to their grave squabbling over who took it. Because you would, because it's the most reproduced photograph in the world. It was me. What's interesting is NASA can't tell which one took it, which I think is wonderful. But they had a Hasselblad camera that they threw in, and they said, take some pictures while you're up there, which is a kind of lovely thing. When you're up there, take some nice pictures. One of the astronauts took a series of photographs. There's a contact strip in NASA. And NASA chose this image. And you can probably see... I'm just going to show you on the clicker. You can see North is at the top here. So you can see this is South Africa down here. This is the South Pole. That's Madagascar. So you can see that Europe and the Mediterranean will be up here. And here is the Arabian Peninsula. Okay? So North is at the top. Iconic image. It kickstarts the environmental movement. Incredibly famous. It's wrong. That is the image that the astronauts took. And can you see it's, do you know what you're going to say when you're going, it's upside down? It's not upside down. It was just taken in a weightless environment. The astronauts snapped it. But to us, we look at it and we see that south is at the top. So you can see now, here is the Cape of Good Hope. This is Central Africa. You can see now, here's the Arabian Peninsula. That's Madagascar. And this is the South Pole, as it were, on top. So what, of course, happened, and just to show you then the 2 images you see on the left, North at the top, which is the image that NASA flipped, right? They showed that image, but that was the one on the right, with South at the top that they had. So they did that because they thought, we Westerners, watch this now, Westerners, the Westerners, want North on top. Why? Why would the Westerners want North on top? It's part of what I'm going to try and say seems to have happened here. So what's interesting is they feel that we're hardwired in Western culture to see North at the top. So I'm going to talk to you about why that might be and give you a sort of sense of why that might be. So I want to start by thinking about these directions, north, east, south, and west. They seem very obvious. They're very, very culturally specific. And they go right back to archaic human history. And we define those north, south, east, west points, often through synonyms back to the idea of what's up, what's down, what's to the left, what's to the right, what's in front of us, and what's behind us. So it's the body, our bodies, and everything that surrounds us, which of course surrounds us, which in early history is a threat. So we need to know what's that direction and what's behind us. So we start to define and give words to these places. So in some African cultures, you can see here in Dogon Rock art in Mali, you have the way in which the head is synonymous with north. And again, the words are often connected. Head is north, legs are south, left arm is east, right arm is west. That very simple little graphic there. One of the things I say in the book is what I think happens, and the other thing is this is thousands of years before the compass is invented. So when we talk about compass points and we go, yeah, it shows north, south, east, and west, those words, or different versions of them, come much earlier. The compass is then discovered and invented, and then people go, all right, let's map on these terms that we've started to use for front and back, up and down. And I'm going to mainly talk, I guess, about Western, Greco-Roman, traditional history, because I guess I look around the room, that's sort of what you're going to know, but others will have a different view when we talk about Islamic or South Asian traditions, even Mesoamerican, which have different approaches to those 4 points of the compass. What's interesting is I think east and west come first. Why is that? Because the sun rises in the east. You've got the questions at the back. So yes, it's the Orient. So in the Latin tradition, Orient, which is the sun rising, the Orients, and then west, of course, is, you understand yourself, east and west. Most cultures define east as their prime direction, as you have in Hebrew. The east is at the front or is forward, and the west is back and behind you. And why is that? Because the east is the place where sun rises. It's a sense of beginning. It's an idea of birth, the idea that you travel in a day. It's like the life cycle. And then in the west, What happens in the west? It is decay, death, darkness, and dissolution. I'm going to show you that no cultures put west on the top of their maps because precisely it's about death and disappearance and decay. So predominantly in early classical cultures, east is the primary direction, not north. North is a very poor candidate. We're going to try and see why that might be. So in Arabic, similarly, you can start to see these terms. Language, very important, as much as the question about signs and orientation around compasses. So in Arabic, north is al-shamal, which is to the left. South is al-janub, right. So the primary orientation, again, is east. So if you're starting to think about left, right, and then you understand east, west. North and south come after east and west because they're harder to work out. Because you've got sun rising, sun setting. That's really easy. So then you have to understand at midday, you've got a north-south axis. And also then you have a thing called a pole star, which comes later, and people go, oh, that's quite north. So north and south comes later. But in many ways, I think now north and south are much more predominant for us. But we can talk about that as well. So, but this is a real whistle-stop tour, so kind of bear with me. But the other thing is that what starts to happen is that direction comes first from the body, and then it comes from winds. So the terms in most cultures for north, south, east, and west come from winds. And this, it's not my discovery, so this is a great cartographic historian called Catherine Delano Smith, who discovered or wrote this up, which this is a clay tablet from Mesopotamia, 2,500 BC, modern-day Western Iran. And you can see the tablet on the left, but on the right, just to kind of try and orientate you, and now you know, orientate. So when you say, I'm disoriented, what that literally means is I'm confused in relation to the east. Disorientation, that's where the word comes from. So you look at this clay tablet looks very sort of anonymous, but if you look on the right, you can start to see the way in which terms are imposed, Mesopotamian terms, for north at the top there, east in the bottom right, can you see, and then west in the bottom left. It's chipped off the missing south, so we don't have that, but we'd assume that you'd have these terms, imnia for north, imkur for west, imkur for east, imartu for west, and the missing south would be imulum. The prefix is about winds. So the point here in classical culture, and it goes right through to the Greeks, is it's a wind that comes towards you. So the north, it's actually more sort of northeast wind, right? That's how you understand and you name those places. And you do that because it's an agrarian culture which needs to know where the winds are coming from, because they can either keep your crops alive or they can flatten them, right? So it's very much about an agrarian society which understands direction in terms of winds coming towards you. We now think about direction as being away, it's over there, that's the west way. But in these traditions, it's about the winds coming towards you. The Greeks take a similar idea, so they inherit those ideas, and this is from Athens, the Greek Tower of the Winds, this is about 100 BC. And they use deities, so personified figures, for those directions, and these terms might start to sound familiar to some of you, so the Greek terms like Boreas for north, Peleiotis for east, and so on, you can see them there. So the Greeks have that tradition about winds, but also personified figures. And then the Roman tradition and the Latin tradition, again, inherits those ideas and then uses terms which start to look familiar to us, and then they start to fuse them with European vernacular terms. So you can see there the old French terms, north-est, and west, it's west, ust, yeah? And you can see on what we now call a compass rose. These are these beautiful compass roses which early navigators know about. Early navigational charts show these compass roses with a north, south, east, west, and they're usually using the classical vernacular languages, the Greek and the Latin, but they're mixing them up because people are using these to sail. So they're starting to use terms which are familiar, everyday, what we call vernacular languages. These are from the 16th century. So from there, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. We're going to other cultures, though. Don't just use the 4 points. So this is a pre-Columbian Mesoamerican, it's an Aztec codex, which shows you the cardinal directions. But what you've got here is at the top, you've got east here. And then you go round, moving clockwise, south, west, and north. But look at the center, this rather remarkable figure here at the center. So this is a fifth direction. It's the center of the world. It's where everything meets. It's the kind of center, the symbol of the current age in terms of Aztec culture, which is called the quincunx. It's a fifth direction, which I think is fascinating to just remind ourselves that we don't always work on the basis of four. Most cultures have four directions from which you then get 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, sailors will know this, into cardinal directions, north by northeast. You know, there's a great story about Alfred Hitchcock, the film North by Northwest. It's not an actual technical direction. It's north-northwest. The film is called North by Northwest, and when they interviewed Hitchcock and they said, why did you call that? He said, because I had no idea where we were going. North by Northwest. But then the compass arrives, and this, I have to tell you, this is why it's wonderful doing the kind of work that we do as kind of historians working in the past, because we don't know why the compass suddenly appears in the Mediterranean in the 12th, 13th century. The magnetic compass appears and is suddenly shown on maps, and people are trying to navigate according to them. Very weird, we don't know why. We do know that the Chinese are really inventing the idea of a compass much earlier, from the Han Dynasty, so around 206 BC, goes right through to 220 AD. What we know is that they use lodestones, naturally recurring forms of magnetite, and you can then create, you can use a pointer that you magnetize. It doesn't necessarily point north, though. It orientates itself, it wiggles on a north-south axis according to the geomagnetic Earth sphere, right? The Chinese put the pointer pointing south. There's no reason why you should put north at the top. In fact, a Chinese compass is known as the thing that points south. Yeah? And so south does just as well. You could just use the south. And that's another lovely Chinese ivory compass, which is in New York, but I just looked at earlier. So just to tell you, and just to give you a sense that there's no reason that north should be at the top. I'm going to try and tell you why that might happen. But the compass appears. Somehow it comes from China, it comes westwards, and we don't really know why. It's an amazing map. It's from 1375. It's by Abraham Cresques. He's a Jewish Mallorcan map maker. And you can see here north, kind of at the top, this very lovely image here. You can see the UK is in the corner. This is North Africa. North Africa all along here, and Southeast Asia here. But we're looking at the insert, this little compass rose here. So that's the detail there that shows you the first compass rose, which is the first evidence that we have of European navigators using compasses to orientate themselves and sail across the Mediterranean. These are the hard slides. I'm going to test you on this after the talk, which is, again, the way in which, as I said to you, these compass roses start to multiply, and the way in which the language, the terms start to mix. Tramontano, an Italian word, which means from across the Alps. The barbarians across the Alps, northern people like us. So again, you start to see, which is what I'm going to show you, that direction starts to take on what you might call a more moralized term, and it says, those people from across the Alps, that's the north, and they're barbaric people and we're civilized. So you start to get this way in which direction takes on a relationship to politics and identity. Then you can see there, east is Levant. But again, remember that Latin term orient is also being used. But this is what the sailors are using, because this is their everyday language, and it includes Arabic. So again, just giving you a quick heads up there. Again, test you on this afterwards. But through the Greek to the Latin and then to the Proto-German vernaculars, the language that we here probably understand more, that you get the mixing of those three traditions, particularly in Western navigation, northeast, south, and west. But then you also get the Levantine, the Mediterranean mariners' language, their lingua franca, which is, again, is mixing in Italian, Spanish, and Arabic. Yeah, so you've got terms like Sirocco. Well, that's from Arabic, from Al-Sharq, which is east in Arabic, and Khabino, which is from Al-Khab, which is west in Arabic. Because, of course, they are, because Jews and Christians and Muslims are all sailing and sharing knowledge in this period across the Mediterranean. So that's really no surprise. So what I want to do now is just quickly run you through the different 4 points of the compass, again, over a few thousand years. So we'll start with the east. And the book deliberately does this because, again, to say, when do we say, what's the mnemonic for northeast, south, and west? Okay, but if you're in America, it's never eat soggy waffles. So again, it's always so specific that the west does north, east, south, west. But why don't we instead use different traditions, as the Chinese do, for instance, and you start with the east? because that's where the sun rises. So I'm going to make that move, and then I'm going to start with the east and go north, south, and then end with the west. So we start with the east. And we start with the east because, obvious point, all churches, the minster around the corner, oriented to the east. Yeah? Ad orientem. You orientate yourself to the east. And that's in all Judeo-Christian tradition. So in the Old Testament, God planted a garden eastward in Eden. Yeah? The God of Israel came by the way of the east. The east is the origins of the world according to the Christian tradition. And this is an example of that. The Hereford Mappamundi, I don't know if any of you have seen it. And the point here, just to try and orientate yourself again, because east is at the top. You see that little roundel there? That's actually the Garden of Eden. If you look very closely, there is Adam and Eve in there. Absolutely, yeah. And above is Christ, and people going to heaven and hell. So outside the map is really where all Christians want to be, because it's very sinful here. This is the earthly world. But it starts in the east, and if you can see, it goes down. This is really a map of time. It's not a map about space. There's the Red Sea, helpfully red. And what you do is you go down, you can see the Tower of Babel. And the text is showing you Old Testament stories. So this is really a visualization of Christianity through the Old into the New Testament. So it's really about time. And it goes all the way through the east to the very center of the map, which is Jerusalem, and shows the crucifixion. And it goes right down. This is the Mediterranean here, and right down to the west here. This is Gibraltar and the Pillars of Hercules. So it's mixing in. It's a mishmash of the Greco-Roman tradition with, what do we call it, the United Kingdom here. I always make this joke, I'm sorry, but this is the sort of Nigel Farage reform version of the United Kingdom, showing Ireland separated, and actually even Scotland separated. But York is marked on that map. So this is from 1300 in Hereford. So it's really a symbolic representation of east at the top, and that really is the Christian theological view of Christianity right through until the 16th century. Here's just another example of it, just to give you another sort of sense of that, just clear that Orient is at the top. You can see Asia is the top half. These are called these TO maps. So you've got the rivers of the Don and the Nile, which go across, and then the Mediterranean down. Europe is in the bottom left. Africa is in the bottom right-hand corner and surrounded by sea. East is at the top, and that is very much what defines right through the late medieval period. And the idea of the East, the Orient. And just to make the point here, I always say that each direction also has certain political payoffs. So, of course, what happens is that once Europe starts to create that idea of the East, the Orient, and define it, and overtake it, and dominate it through colonial and imperial ideology and practice, you then get you define people as Orientals. There is no such thing as Oriental people. Right? It is a myth, it's a stereotype. And the great Palestinian critic, Edward Said, wrote about this in 1978 in this brilliant book called Orientalism. And on the right, just an example of a very Orientalist painting by French painter Delacroix, showing, the idea the Orient is this place of sort of indolence, licentious sexuality, despotism, it's dirty, it's backward. This is a myth, and this is the point that Said made. And the point I want to keep coming back to about the way in which each direction has those issues and problems. So to be careful when we sort of, fetishize the idea of I'm a northerner, that usually comes at the expense in the end of saying, and I don't like the people down there, and I don't like the southerners. So it's a worry sometimes, I think, when we sort of celebrate that idea of being a northerner or being an easterner, an orientalist, an oriental. And south, we could do something similar with south. So south is another great option to have at the top of the map. And the Egyptians understand their orientation around the Nile, because if you think about it, the way in which ancient Egypt works, it operates in terms of the Nile. So what you're seeing is a north-south axis, and therefore at the top, if you can see here, this is a stone sarcophagus, which has the world of Egypt. It's difficult to see. I'm going to show you a map which gives you a sense of it. This is Egypt with southern Africa, as it were, Africa here at the top. Upper Egypt at the top, lower Egypt, where the Nile flows into the Mediterranean, is down here. Yeah? So south is at the top. And just to give you a sense, does that orientate you better in a way? So north, is at the bottom, as it were, and south is at the top. And those terms are, again, those classical Egyptian terms. That's the kind of language that you get. East is left, south is the head, is the beginning, is upper, right? West is at the right-hand side. North is about the feet. It's submerged. It's down river. So again, it's a reorientation. But there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. As Islamic culture understood as well. So these are classical medieval Islamic maps where south is at the top. And these are probably very unfamiliar to you. But what you can see here on the left, a very schematic map, sea all around everything. South is at the top because this line is the Nile. Imagine that is therefore Egypt. These are the islands in the Mediterranean. This is Spain. And this is Europe, because, of course, if you're working here in Iraq, just as vice versa, that area is kind of you're not really interested in that. So what you are interested in is the dead center of the map, which is the Arabian Peninsula. It's Mecca and Medina. And if you look on the right, should have flipped the screen. If you just do that, it'll make more sense. Right? This is Muhammad al-Idrisi doing a similar version of the map. Here you have the Iberian Peninsula. Here is Europe. We are somewhere here. This is North Africa. Again, these very, very now elaborate origins of the Nile called the Mountains of the Moon, which are here. Again, roughly the center of the map is the Arabian Peninsula and the holy sites of Islam. So this whole bit is sort of terra incognita. It's sort of Central Africa, because nobody until the Portuguese get round the Cape in 1488 is there a sense that you can get round Southern Africa. So for Islam, south is at the top. And that seems to be because the early cultures that convert during the Prophet Muhammad's time and just after his death are due north of Mecca and Medina. So how do they understand and how do they worship their holy sites? They just go, well, due south is up. Up is where we pray to. So south is initially the prime orientation in early Islam. It changes. Any believers here will know that Qibla is a whole different process of how you orientate yourself in terms of praying towards the holy sites. Talk about that, it's a different story. But in this early period, south is at the top. South does just as well. And again, the way in which that obviously plays out around imperial and colonial histories, on the left is a rather playful map by an Australian guy called Stuart MacArthur. MacArthur's Universal Corrective Map of the World, which is from 1979. MacArthur, as a kid, was asked by his school teacher to draw a map of the world. So he drew this, and his teacher said, Stuart, you've got it wrong. And he went, no, I haven't. It's right. It's just, we can put south at the top, and you can see very playfully he puts the compass orientation with south at the top. Yeah? So he says, no, we're correcting all the imperial histories which have put north at the top. There is nothing wrong with this map. We can have a discussion about projections and equal area and get into that. But in terms of its orientation, south does just as well. It is a European colonial tradition that has put north at the top, right? There's no reason why you can't use south. And it's quite funny, in the map, in the text, he says, long live Australia, centre of the world. It's fine, it's absolutely fine. And I kind of like it, because I think what it does, and maybe as you're all looking at it, it disorientates your sense in a quite positive way, because you suddenly go, oh, hang on, that's really interesting. So Indonesia is much closer to Africa than you might think, or, oh, look at the size, basically, of the Pacific. I think it just flips your idea. There's nothing wrong with it, technically. And you just maybe go, makes you think away in a different sense about what should be up or what should be down. And on the right is a Uruguayan artist from the 1940s, Joaquin Torres Garcia, who again says, look, it's a European tradition that talks about South America, right? South Africa. Right? Why are these places labelled so? Usually because of European colonial definitions by mapmakers saying, this is south, this is north, etc., etc. So Torres Garcia just says, well, we can just invert it, and you can see there. So you've got Cape Horn is at the bottom, up here at the top. You can see here. And he has the line in Uruguay, Montevideo. Those are the dimensions, those are the coordinates for Montevideo. So I like what he's done there to just say, let's just flip it. There's no reason why we can't do that. Now we come to the north. There's Joy Division in the corner. Misspent youth of me. That's not me in the bottom left-hand corner, by the way, just to let you know. So just iconic images of the north. Why do we have north at the top? I'm going to suggest quickly that I think it's because of this guy. He's a Hellenic Egyptian, black Egyptian mapmaker. We usually call him Greek, but I don't think that really covers what he is. Working in Alexandria, centre of the map, look at the map, in 150 AD, and he writes a book called The Geography. And he says, we know the world is a sphere, by the way, so it's a complete myth. It's a complete myth. You know, the Greeks know that the Earth is a sphere, like Ptolemy, like Aristotle and Plato. They all know that the Earth is a sphere, and he says, how do you project the Earth, a sphere, onto a flat piece of paper? So he says, well, this is one way you do it, and you can sort of hopefully orientate yourself here again. This is the sort of Hellenic world. Here's Alexandria, where he's working. And what Ptolemy says in his book in 150 AD, he says, imagine what the world looks like if you're in deep space, which is a bit like the Apollo image, right? And he's writing in 150 AD. Sorry, and he says, imagine looking at the Earth from deep space. He says, so what you need to do is make a projection. You put a pin, you can read it. The book's, you know, you can get a copy of the text. You put a pin up here, and you put some string, and the string goes down here, and you attach a pencil to it, and then you create like those. It's like battleships. You know, you just the curved parallels there, and then with a ruler, you draw the meridians down. Can you see? Now, obviously, it's a bit of a problem, because you've got to do a sharp turn here. And this is all sub-Saharan Africa, because, again, the Greeks don't have a sense that you can get round the Cape of Good Hope. But this is his model, and it's not ideological, it's not political, it's not religious. It's just him saying, as Aristotle does the same thing, he says, in geometry, this is a good way just to kind of create a map of the Earth. And of course, what happens there south is at the top. Other traditions also put north at the top. Look at this. I really want to hopefully blow your mind with this image. This is a Korean map from 1402, made in Korea here. No spoiler alerts, Korea is not that big, right? It's the sort of Kim Il-jong image of Korea, right? And this is Japan. This is all of China, which is the sort of center of the kind of Korean world picture anyway. This rather brilliantly in the corner here, this is, look, that's India. Can you see that? That's India. India, small place. Willie Dalrymple will tell you all about that next week. Here is Africa. What's fascinating for us is that it shows a circumnavigable southern Africa in 1402, and that's the West African coast. And here is Europe. And it's actually, in the text, you can see there's a text which is labeled Alemannia, Germany. The Koreans knew about Germany in 1402. And I just love to show it, to say, look at the extensiveness of that image. North is at the top, but not because of any European influence, because in Chinese and Korean imperial language, the emperor looks down, which is a synonym for south. The subjects look up, north. That's why north is at the top in Chinese maps, okay? But in the Renaissance period, my favorite period, just to show you here, this is a sense of, there are zillions of different map projections saying, what do we put at the top? What do we put at the middle? We've no idea, because we've discovered a whole new continent and a whole new ocean, the Pacific. So we could do what we do in the top left and sort of do it from the North Pole. Or we could do it like Waldseemüller does it in the middle left, which is a world shaped like a heart. A world shaped like a heart? Why? Are you mad? There are all so many different kinds of projections. So even at this time, nobody knows what goes at the top. Until this guy, Mercator. Some of you will know the famous map projection he's a Flemish map maker called Jerry Mercator. And he does this map in 1569, and it's a map which he says is for use in navigation. And he says, we've got to a point where and watch this, we're all traveling in ships east to west. Can you see all these ships across here in the Atlantic here and down here? They're all going via the Cape Horn or via Cape of Good Hope. Nobody's going north or south because it's too cold. So Mercator says, look, this is the problem. If you're trying to mimic the curvature of the Earth's surface, if you draw a straight line from, say, Southampton to Cuba, you want to draw a straight line, but you'll basically go off course because you're not taking into account the curvature of the Earth's surface. So I'm going to create a map, a world map, for use in navigation, which lengthens, okay, can you see, lengthens the parallels going north. Can you see how wide they are up here? And down here, south. So minimal distortion if you're sailing east to west, right? But maximum distortion if you're going north to south. But nobody wants to go up there because it's too icy. And look at the result. And Mercator says this in all this text that he has, and this one's interesting. This is the North Pole down here. Look at the north and south poles. They are projected to infinity. Look at the size of it here. That's the South Pole. Greenland is also massively inflated. And nobody told Donald Trump that when he claimed Greenland, because he said size matters and I really want Greenland. It's like, oh, you don't know your map projections, you fool. So the point here, though, is that north, Mercator puts north at the top. It's the great navigational method of sailing on a straight line, which is reasonably accurate. But he puts north at the top, and he projects it to infinity, because nobody wants to go there. People are trying to get to the northeast and the northwest passage to get to China, and they just disappear in the ice. Elizabeth sends various people to do this. John Dee tells people to go up there, and they just disappear in the ice. So Mercator goes, look, we don't need to project it there. So I love the great irony that the great European projection, which puts north at the top, puts it there, because nobody wants to go there. And if we just want to sort of pause and not trust Mercator quite too much, because if you look at that little inset map that I showed you, he tells you some very odd things. It's in Latin, but just believe me, he says, actually, there is a magnetic North Pole, and it is a piece of rock which is a huge magnet. And not only that, the world's oceans all flow up there, and they flow inside, because the Earth's hollow. And there are 4 islands surrounding it, on which pygmies live. It's not true. So you do kind of go, not so sure about Gerard. Anyway, so as ever, always be sort of suspicious about the kind of great scientific innovations that you get, which project that idea of the North. And again, to say about the problems and the issues of the North, I'm running ahead because we have to finish in a minute. The great story, some of you know, Robert Peary, the American discoverer, claims the North Pole in April 1909. Well, as some of you will know, there are 2 versions of the North Pole. There's a magnetic version and there's a true geographical one, and they're different, and they move. So when Peary goes and he says, right, this is the North Pole, well, nobody really knows where it is. Again, hint, there are no poles, right? It's a very old Greek idea that the world is at the center of the universe and that there's a bloody great big pole going right through it. There isn't, right? But there is no there when you get to the North Pole. You can calculate it and make a claim, and Peary does, but actually Peary doesn't, because he gets frostbite. So he stops a couple of miles before where he thinks he is, and he sends on his mate, Matthew Henson, who's an African-American, and Henson goes, I'm here. So the first person who gets to the pole, we believe, based on a very, very rough estimate of where the pole is a black guy who works for Peary, and Peary just obliterates him from the record, and now we are reclaiming him. So again, this claim, about I've got there first, that whole idea about claiming the North or the South. And now we have the same problem with what we call not a gold rush, but a cold rush for the North. Great book. Margaret Atwood has written a wonderful, wonderful little book. It's a book about Canadian fictional representation of the North, and it's absolutely brilliant. I really recommend it. Not many people pick up on it. I think it's fabulous. And she makes this point, about the way in which the North is changing, because all these directions change and shift. We don't really talk as much about the East or the Orient anymore. We talk about the global South and the global North. When I was growing up, we talked more about the developing and the developed world and the third world. And we've just transposed some of those language, particularly around global South and global North. So they always keep moving. They're always relative. And the idea of what's happening now to the North Pole, this is a map done in Durham about the competing states laying claim. Now that the poles are melting, because, of course, the mineral possibilities and the wealth as ever, the greediness of, kind of new neo-colonial cold rush, particularly being led, surprise, surprise, by the green here laying claim to so much of the North Pole region, Russia. And other places as well, so they're not innocent. But that sense in which, what happens now to the North, and a sense in which it does come into the play, much more so than what we've seen here, the Mercator tradition, which says we put North at the top because it's not very important. And now that's changing altogether. I'm going to end just quickly, one final minute. I just want to look at this idea of the West. I said to you that no cultures put West at the top. And this is now a little bit of a cheeky one to say, what happens when people, I know you did like that, I like how you did that there. How does that work? You've got it. Actually, this is a map from 1500 by a Basque mapmaker who travels with Columbus in 1492. He's called Juan de la Cosa. And this is one of the first maps to show the first Columbus voyage. And what's fascinating about it is if you look at it here, you get used to this now. This is all, this is Europe up here, UK, this is Africa down here. Now it's circumnavigable because the Portuguese have got there. There's Asia, you can see, gets a bit hazier. But this is on a different scale. He's drawing this much more in detail because this is the new discoveries in the Americas. And here is the Caribbean. Here's Cuba and Hispaniola. This figure here is St. Christopher. It's a kind, exactly, yeah, it's Christopher Columbus. It's like he's the great patron, you know, of travel, of discovery. So it's a sort of bigging up of Columbus. And here is a compass rose with a Madonna. You can see it's got north with its orientation, but some of you did that and may have seen some of the typography on it. I think it should be that way up. That at a certain moment in early European imperial outreach, there's a sense in which, oh, maybe the direction we're going is this way, east. And actually the text on it shows that it should be read that way up. So we should look at it with west at the top. And just the last one to show you is what that narrative is. It's about manifest destiny. The idea very much now in sort of hard right American foreign policy of manifest destiny, that American policy is always going west. And this is captured in this amazing piece of work, which is in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Westward, the course of empire takes its way. All the way to the Bay of San Francisco down here. All these pioneers saying, you know, go west, young man, that whole narrative, go west. You know, it doesn't matter about slaves, it doesn't matter about indigenous people, just smash them to pieces, keep going west. And that, of course, now very powerfully and very tragically is driving so much of what's happening in the States. And I know because I've just been there the last 6 months, which was quite mad. So again, be really careful when, of course, we buy into this idea of the West, of course, the West. And it is this idea that I guess now is politically so troubling for us at the moment. So that's the tour. That's it. I'm done, but please ask me some questions. Oh, we've got roving mics. And do you have, is that a question? Or you...
Very extensive, profound work to see of you. And I am a Northern Irish and indigenous Mexican, come from the Otomi, Aztec, and Purepecha. And when you showed the map with the 4 directions, we have you call Tlalapa, but we called Tlahuizcampa on the east, and that place where Venus is. So we have the mountains, the 2 volcanoes, and when we stand there in the small mountain in front of the 2 volcanoes, where they call it the Pass of Cortes, where the colonists come through, but it's where the sun comes up. So we have, in the traditional Aztec dancing, we have the 5 winds. And the first wind is in the Tlahuizcampa, Tlahuizcalpantecutliquetzalcoatl, we called, and that's when we go to the sanctuary of the volcanoes of Señor de Sacromonte. And then we have the west, because in the west is where the waters used to come. I did a bit of study on the water systems on Mexico City throughout the time. And that's why, as well, we have the temple of Mayahuel and the fertility, and that's why the woman is there. And then Mictlampa, the place of the ancestors, Mictlantecutli, the keeper of the dead, he is there in north because there was a pilgrimage of the Aztec coming from the north, so all the ancestors were actually coming from the north. And then the south, because that was the cut to be Mesoamerica, to bear the water, because it's a very arid space, and then it becomes a very watery space. So I would see it as every medicine wheel. That's why I was really amazed about the compass, because I'm very into all the medicine wheel studies. You have every culture, every indigenous culture will make it based on what is the geography and, as you say, the politics. This comes from George Amiot from the Oglala, Dakota. We have the medicine wheel where you have the east the spiritual, north the mental, west the physical, and south the emotional bodies. And then this comes from other Ojibwe elders in Canada. You have the medicine wheels that are stones that not only go directions but go to animals. Yeah. So you'll have the 4 directions, but then the connections between them, and then the connections from that direction to the center, and each stone will be a different animal. Yeah. So each culture will be based on that geography. So I just want to congratulate your work, because you are building bridges and you are deconstructing and doing this work of the epistemology of decolonization, where you're actually bringing the best of both worlds. And that's so important. So I just want to acknowledge that, and I just wanted to further a bit deeper with it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I mean, can you help me with my next book? Because, but I mean, it is wonderful, because you scratch the surface of this, and once you try and sort of say these directions and these ideas are not natural, they're very cultural, and the way in which that kind of description you've given has been obliterated to some extent because of certain Western imperial traditions. And also, it's about reconnection with the natural world, which I guess, we're sorry to say, they're very political. So the way in which you think about North and South, East and West have been so hardwired, particularly around imperial and colonial traditions. So thank you, because I'd say there's more that we need to know and discover. I just scratched the surface around wanting to acknowledge that this is, of course, a global story, and different cultures will define themselves in different ways and constrict themselves in relation to the natural world. And I guess part of what happens, I end the book sort of saying, one of the problems is that we've gone from the blue marble image that we saw at the beginning, where we can all buy into a common humanity to say, look at the beauty of that image. Look at how precious it is. And I say by the end, we're now dealing with a blue dot. Because we don't look up, we look at the blue dot on our phone. So we've gone from the blue marble to the blue dot, and I think there's a worry there that globalization is not about us looking up, it's about us looking down and buying stuff. I think we just need to be really careful about that, because when we always say that the maps are basically colonial objects, I also want to hold on to the wonder of that, the wonder of those images about the world from above looking down. Because, the globe doesn't have any directions, it's a sphere. It doesn't have a north or a south or an east or a west. So why should we impose identity politics on them? Give you a little query. Why, if you go north, will you start going south? But if you go east, you'll never start going west? Because we've created a thing called the North and the South Pole. Yeah, it is connected to the geomagnetic center of the Earth, but we don't have an east or a west pole. So if you start going north, you're going to hit the North Pole. And when you start going down, as Shackleton said, I'm standing at the top of the world and I'm now going down, south. But it's a myth. It's a culturally created notion. Yes, they are, as it were, natural points. We do have a compass point which points north and there's a south. But it is our imagination and projection to name them so. But if you go east, you just keep going east. Where are you going? So you go from, you go from Mozambique and you sail eastwards. You're always going east. Your direction is always east. You're never going to start going west. Because we didn't put a landmark. We didn't have something called a pole, which makes that difference. So always be careful when you're sort of, I think, sorry, that's so preachy. But the point's made in terms of that great, great comment. So just thank you about, the way in which you have to always think culturally specific. And what you're wiping out or obliterating when you're starting to say the West, or the North, or whatever. Anyway, do we have time for more? Yeah, good. Okay, great. Gentleman there. Oh, yeah, okay.
The north-south, you haven't mentioned the world spinning, and it spins around an axis, which tends to be north-south or south-north, whatever way you look at it. Yeah. If it's spun the other way, east-west, that might be interesting.
Yeah, but you're still spinning on an axis, aren't you? So you're right, and it's very unusual, actually. Not all planets spin that way. but you've still got the axis, which is defining you on a pole in that way. But yeah, you're right, but what might it do? What would that help? I mean, we'd have a problem when we might have a geomagnetic reversal, and you know this might happen, the poles might switch. The poles could switch, it's very likely. And what that might do is a whole different question. But what are you thinking? That then that might reorientate your sense of east and west, which I guess, yeah, it would.
Well, it's got something to do, perhaps, with the fluid iron core of the Earth.
Yeah.
And the magnetic field around that, affecting the weather systems and the winds and everything else.
Yeah. Which would, again, I think, therefore, you'd just reorientate, that word. You'd reorientate your sense of those directions, and you'd give them different terms and labels. So again, it would make the point that it's very much, it's not completely arbitrary, you know, that way in which, you know, language works in a certain way. So I always make this joke, and I've got my father-in-law in the audience, who's a sailor. So, you know, if he's on board a boat in Turkey and he goes, Jerry, you need to turn west. I don't go, but Roger, west is an abstract, complicated relative term. He goes, Jerry, do it now or we will die. And I go, okay. So there is that sense in which it depends in which, as linguists would say, the regime within which you speak. When you say north, north. Is that north in terms of as a sense of identity, or north in terms of direction? And it depends on what you inhabit. And so I think you do the same thing. So I always tussled in the book that the sense in which these are the most cultural, but at the same time natural conceptions. You know, the sun does rise over there. But once you name it and you say, that is east, and then therefore you say that, and I'm going to give that another word, which is west. You know, it's what happens then once language and, as it were, anthropology takes over and then starts to say, and then you go in that direction, and then you start taking over from the people who are there, or you start moralizing about the people that are there. But again, as I say, we hold on to the fact that I'm not ditching that, because I'm still using my phone to get back to Birmingham today, and I'm still on board the boat and doing what Roger says when I'm told to. So, you know, they work in different ways, which is why hold on to your hats, because there is an argument here about how direction works, and it is quite clear. It's not just it means anything and everything. I don't think it does, but it was great to tussle with that with the book, which is very short. It's just one chapter. He says selling the book. Right at the top, somebody there in the hat who's been throwing their hand up, so this is going to be good.
It's less going to be good, it's more... this has, what I've realized is despite not knowing any of this, I always get very annoyed with my maps because I always want to rotate them so east is at the top. Like I say I came down here from where I live on the east side of York.
Yeah.
And I've always baffled my parents by doing this.
Yeah.
I now feel justified.
If your mum and dad get in touch with me, I'm not responsible. No, I'm joking. But yeah, you're right. Again, that's again a sort of a language issue, isn't it? So the community has to agree on that term and say, yes, that is east. But of course, if you agree that it's not, it's the opposite, you know, and you just need to work on that. But there is a version of that, yeah, it's about community agreement about what those directions mean. So that's why language becomes so important. I was never sure about calling the book 4 Points of the Compass because it made it sound more of a kind of history of science. So I gave you a kind of quick run through about the compass. What shocked me is, once I was writing about it, is that within the widespread of history, it's a relatively recent invention. And it's dying. So Google tell me that they're taking the compass off the phone because what they're trying to work out is when you come out of somewhere and you are disoriented. You come out of that door, and which way are we going? Yeah. So they're using now photographic technology to capture where you are, to orientate you. And actually, so the compass is becoming residual in our everyday life. It will remain in a way, I think, around navigation. But it is becoming residual. We're losing a sense of it.
I also have a question, comment thing.
Sorry?
Which was related to that, which was I had heard at some point that part of why compasses and map projections and stuff got quite so big is there was a lucky overlap of the centuries when the magnetic and geographic north were closest.
Yeah.
Happened to be the ones where we got boats that could cross oceans.
Yeah.
And it's gone back to being farther, so a compass is actually noticeably less useful for finding your map north than it would have been 2 centuries ago.
That's true, yeah. And so Columbus's log is full of accounts about how he's taking account for magnetic declination, so the differences between magnetic and absolute north, because he's trying to understand that distinction. And of course now we have more sophistication in terms of being able to understand that, and they're further apart. But yeah, it is an interesting moment. And again, I'm not so, the Mercator, and Mercator is fascinated by what you're describing, magnetism. So that text is all about magnetism in the magnetic north. So it's one answer to, and I don't think I've necessarily solved it, why the north comes on top. But there is that sense in which that meeting point at this period makes north a kind of very compelling point to navigate according to the pole star, but also according to other instruments that you're using and developing from the late 15th into the early 16th century. So I'm not particularly, I'm still not sure, And the thing I went into a seminar, because I'm not trained in geography, I'm literature, I did literature. And I remember going into all the historians of cartography one seminar, and I said, look, I'm sorry, because I'm doing a PhD in maps of literature. I said, why is north at the top? And there was this deafening silence. And I went, no, do none of you know? And and I went, I'm going to write a book about this. You don't know. And they still don't know. So it's still a debate, I think, because it's so much about, I guess, what the book is dealing with, which is crossing politics and science and anthropology, and what we heard earlier from that amazing sort of sense of how you can construct direction and orientation in very, very different ways. So I'm sorry, God knows what you're going to do when you walk out of here today.
We've got time for one more.
Oh, yeah, great.
A fast one. That lady down there. Oh, sorry, gentleman. No, actually, that doesn't matter. You've got your hand on. The lights are so bright.
Hi. I'm perceiving that part of the challenge with us deciding what's the top and what's the bottom is because actually mathematically we're trying to describe, or maps are picturing a two-dimensional body in a three-dimensional world.
Yeah.
And that actually we've only got 2 dimensions on the map. We've got east and minus east, and south and minus south.
Yeah.
And the up and down are actually perpendicular to it.
Yeah.
But because we stand on it, we all get really muddled up.
Yeah. And I think that's really the point of the argument about Ptolemy. The point about Ptolemy, that is a geometrical, mathematical point, and that's really what Plato and Aristotle say as well, that you project the idea of a two-dimensional surface. They say, you can't do it. You cannot, square the circle, you can't square a sphere. So I think you're absolutely right that in the end, that's what really does it, because Ptolemy, of course, isn't working with magnetism. He's just working, as you say, with a mathematical grid, what we call a graticule. That's a graticule, of the parallels and meridians. And he says, if you read it, and it's very germane to what you were saying, I should have brought a slide of it. Ptolemy then says, that's one way of doing it, and there's another way. So you can have curved parallels and curved meridians. He says, but that's just really hard, because you don't have the bits, you've just got to do that. You don't have a ruler to make those kind of hard lines. And he says, wonderfully, to your point, he says, the second projection is better, because it's how the world would look from space. This is in 150 AD. Now, there's no conspiracy theories here. He is all of Western geography and mathematics in terms of thinking about the sphere, is imagining, until 1972 with that Apollo image, is imagining the world from above. And therefore, how you project it, how you manage it, as you've just described it, on, as it were, a grid. And everybody from Ptolemy onwards says you have to make sacrifices. You're going to have to distort. You're just going to have to. Nobody believes that there's an absolute perfect map. You all know this. It's people like Lewis Carroll and George-Louis Borges who say the only accurate map is one on a scale of 1 to 1. And Lewis Carroll says this in Mine Hair, and he says, but we used it, but it was really bad for the crops. So we had to get rid of it, and then you have to be selective. And Borges has a similar story on exactitude in science. And he says, there was a map on a scale of 1 to 1, but in the end it was useless, and you can still find bits of it, tattered remnants in the desert. So he says, you have to make decisions, you have to be selective, and you have to make a mathematical decision. And Ptolemy's is, I think, fascinating in terms of how he describes what you've captured. And I think that defines, for me, a moment where north makes sense. It's a mathematical, geometrical decision. And then it happens to collide, I think, with the way in which the compass can then orientate you north-south. But as I say, that just depends where you put the arrow Right? That's the only difference it makes. And if you're Chinese, you can put that arrow pointing south, and in the Mediterranean, you have it pointing north. That's the only difference. So, yeah, thank you. It's good.
Okay, very sadly, because we could be here all day, that concludes Jerry's canter through the economic, social, religious, cultural connotations of maps. I work at a university, that's my day job, and if ever there was an embodiment of why knowledge for its own sake, but also the use of knowledge and the importance of history in today's climate is never been more important. So thank you so, so much for such a brilliant, brilliant exposition of why we should care far more than we possibly think about maps and compasses. And as the woman who literally can't use a Google map, and I've never yet gone in the direction of the blue dot without having to turn back again, that was completely fascinating. Thank you so much. I should also thank our fantastic audience. You turn out for these events, even when it's blazing sunshine and it might be pouring with rain tomorrow. So thank you so much. But a huge thank you to Jerry, who asked if we were going to have our minds blown. Mine is certainly blown. So thank you so much. There are many books for sale. Please buy with abandon. Thank you so much, Jerry.